Hello there, you're following World News live from Algiers. To the headlines. After Washington threatened to impose the toughest sanctions in history, Iran called for resistance to the sanctions and vowed a devastating response to any new US threats. Renewed international rejection of the Israeli occupation's E1 settlement project in the West Bank, with President Abbas welcoming the move and calling for the plan to be halted as settler violence kills a child in the town of Sayr near Al-Khalil. In Sudan, 3 civilians were killed in RSF shelling in West Kordofan as the Sudanese army announced strikes on RSF positions in the region. Meanwhile, the Sudan Doctors Network warned that the health system remains paralyzed in areas under RSF control. At least 15 killed in a Russian drone attack on shopping center in central Ukraine, while Moscow reports 3 deaths in Ukrainian attacks on Donetsk and Luhansk. Meanwhile, Kyiv says nearly 300 gas stations have been damaged by Russian strikes. Welcome to our program, and these are the details. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said Iran must develop plans to overcome unjust sanctions following US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's announcement of what he called the toughest sanctions ever imposed on Iran. Speaking Friday in Baghdad, Ghalibaf said economic development and security are closely linked. He accused the US and the Israeli occupation of waging an economic and knowledge-based war after concluding they could not defeat Iran and Iraq militarily.
If you look at the resources and raw materials of Islamic countries, you will realize that our enemies are seeking to plunder them. Therefore, we must devise plans to deal with unjust sanctions so that we can overcome them.
Iran has vowed an overwhelming response to any US threats. Iranian Armed Forces Chief of Staff Major General Ali Abdullahi said on Friday that Iran's land, naval, air defense and cyber forces would respond decisively. He also described recent advances in Iran's defense industry as a deterrent defense industrial revolution. Iranian Defense Ministry official Ziadin Agha Jampur said Tehran is capable of responding harshly to any further threats, warning that enemy missteps would bring consequences they would regret. Speaking in Simnam on Thursday, Agha Jampur said Iran's armed forces are at the height of their strength, crediting the country's resilience and the efforts of its scientists, experts, and defense specialists.
The country's scientists and intellectuals have achieved great accomplishments in the field of defense, and this capability is the result of years of effort and struggle by the country's experts. The defensive strength of the Islamic Republic of Iran is the result of the people's resilience and steadfastness, as well as the efforts of the country's scientists, intellectuals, and defense experts. Today, the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran are at the height of their strength, and the country's scientists and experts have developed valuable capabilities in the field of defense. This strength is the result of the efforts of the country's scientists, intellectuals, specialists, and armed forces who have worked for years to strengthen the Islamic Republic of Iran's defense capabilities.
US Vice President J.D. Vance said increased economic pressure is the best way to defeat Iran after its military capabilities have been neutralized. He said tougher sanctions could force Tehran to change its calculations and choose between economic isolation and normal international relations. On the Strait of Hormuz, Vance said the US had secured the passage of large oil shipments and weakened Iran's control, adding that Washington would continue efforts to keep the strait open and prevent Iran from using it as a weapon. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Washington would impose the toughest sanctions in history on Iran, arguing the move could reduce the need for major new military operations. Speaking to CNBC Channel on Thursday, Bessent followed President Donald Trump's threat of an economic war against countries assisting Iran. He said details of the new measures would be announced next week.
We do have control of the strait. You would have seen media reports that large amounts of energy are getting out, and I think that we can continue doing that in the southern lane, and that I think oil markets are misinterpreting what this economic pressure means. The economic pressure means that we are going to all of our allies, and this is going to be the greatest coordinated economic isolation in the history of the world.
The U.S. Treasury Secretary added that the anticipated sanctions package would be a double blow, stressing that the measures would yield results in Iran and calling on U.S. allies and the rest of the world to take a decision on the matter.
It is time for our allies and the rest of the world to make a decision, and we are going to squash the economy of this murderous regime, which that will curtail their ability to project power through their proxies. It will mean that they cannot pay the military, and we have substantial inflation, both food inflation and ordinary inflation in Iran. And what we have seen, I see lots of reports that said, "Oh, well, this has never worked." It does work because we have a combination. It is a 1-2 punch. We have the blockade, and we are going to have the toughest sanctions in history.
China said that what it described as U.S. sanctions and pressure in Iran are not the solution. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian said at a regular press briefing on Friday that sanctions and pressure would not help resolve the issue, stressing that Beijing urges all parties concerned to act responsibly and settle their differences through political and diplomatic means.
China always maintained that military means, sanctions and pressure will not help resolve the issue. They will only exacerbate tensions and escalate the situation, which is in no one's interest. We call on all parties to resolve differences and disputes through dialogue and consultation.
U.S. President Donald Trump said Iran's military capabilities have been significantly weakened, with Iran now possessing only limited numbers of drones and greatly reduced ability to produce missiles. Speaking on radio Thursday, Trump claimed the U.S. strikes had taken out Iran and its leadership and made it difficult for Tehran to rebuild its military capabilities, leaving the country in a difficult position. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian called Friday for an end to the war with the United States, saying Iran should conclude the conflict while in a position of strength and dignity. Speaking in Tehran, Pezeshkian described the outcome of negotiations as a major achievement and said the Memorandum of Understanding with Washington contains no provision requiring Iran's surrender. Russia denied putting pressure on Iran to resume negotiations and end the war in the Middle East. Speaking to reporters in New York on Thursday evening, Russia's UN ambassador Vasily Nebenzia said Iran is an independent country and it is up to Tehran to decide whether to negotiate with the United States. He reiterated Moscow's criticism of what he called the indiscriminate and unjustified aggression carried out by the United States against Iran.
As a matter of principle, does not put any pressure on anybody, be it Iran or any other country. Iran is a sovereign nation. They decide for themselves. We discussed that issue too, and we know that the genesis of the conflict is not in what Iran did or what it didn't do, but at the reckless and unprovoked aggression that U.S. waged against Iran. And I don't think that it is Iran that withdrew from fulfilling the agreements that were reached between the U.S. and Iran with the help of the mediators. So I don't think that we have to blame Iran for this, but the issue is being discussed in the Council. It didn't happen this year, but I'm sure we will address it. We will address it in the course of the month.
U.S. Central Command said its forces have diverted 67 commercial vessels since the naval blockade of Iran resumed on July 14th. In a statement on Friday, CENTCOM said that U.S. forces had disabled 3 vessels and carried out boarding operations on 2 others. Belgium has rejected the Israel occupation's implementation of the e-settlement project in the occupied West Bank. Belgian Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost said on Friday that Brussels was joining countries opposing the project, adding that the occupation's decision violates international law and undermines hopes for achieving peace. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas welcomed the joint international statement opposing the Israeli occupation's E1 settlement plan, urging its immediate reversal and an end to settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank. Abbas praised the country's reaffirmation that the occupation's settlements are illegal and threaten the two-state solution. He called on the countries, the EU, the UN, the United States and UN Security Council members and wider international community to take concrete action to halt the plan and all settlement activities. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Ramallah said 17-year-old Karim Sanad Shalada was killed after armed settlers attacked Sair northeast of Al Khalil. Wafa reported that settlers opened a live fire on Palestinian homes in Khirbat Hamroush, killing Shalada and injuring an elderly man. The attackers also reportedly set fire to a home. Hamas said the Israel occupation's efforts to Judaize Al-Aqsa Mosque and alter its Islamic identity would fail, urging Arab and Muslim countries to act to protect Al-Quds and the holy sites. In a statement marking the 57th anniversary of the Aqsa Mosque arson attack, Hamas warned of escalating Zionist measures, including raids, religious rituals, and attempts to change the status quo at the compound. It also cited National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's reported authorization of Jewish prayer books and organized Jewish prayers at the site.
The burning of the Al-Aqsa Mosque represents a dangerous milestone in the ongoing targeting of the city of Al-Aqsa and Al-Aqsa Mosque, as well as its Islamic identity. What Al-Aqsa Mosque is witnessing today in terms of escalating incursions, Talmudic rituals and attempts to impose new realities on the ground is a continuation of that crime and an aggression against our nation, its holy sites, and its civilizational heritage. The occupation has neither sovereignty nor legitimacy over Al-Aqsa Mosque, and its plans to Judaize, alter its landmarks, erase its identity, divide it temporarily and spatially, or legitimize Talmudic rituals within its precincts will not succeed.
The United Nations has warned of a sharp deterioration in the humanitarian situation in Gaza, saying 94% of Palestinians in the Strip need shelter and essential household supplies. Amid the ongoing Israeli occupation, UN Secretary General spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric said at a regular press briefing in New York on Thursday that 4 in 5 families in shelters are facing critical or catastrophic levels of hunger, while those shelters are also suffering from severe shortages in fuel, energy, and basic household supplies.
In a small tent in the Mashallah area of Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, Palestinians are beginning an effort to save what remains of the territory's agricultural land. Here, the tent is no longer just a shelter. It has become a modest seed bank at a time when Israel's genocidal war has devastated the foundations of agricultural life in Gaza.
Commercial seeds today are hybrid seeds that have been genetically engineered to give you one abundant harvest. They produce well only once. If you try to plant them a second time, they may give you only 30 or 40% of the yield. Local seeds, however, allow for continued production.
Since 2017, the Al-Qarara Seed Bank has preserved local seeds for farmers, but Israel destroyed its headquarters during the war on Gaza, wiping out much of its stock. After repeated displacement, the team saved what it could and set up a small tent in Deir al-Balah to rebuild its reserves. The bank also distributed seeds to farmers who returned them after harvest, helping sustain the stock for others.
With agricultural supplies cut off at the crossings and their entry prevented, the only safety valve was to create a food basket from local seeds already available inside the Gaza Strip, seeds that can be produced and propagated within Gaza.
But the task is growing harder as the Israeli war devastates Gaza's farmland and agricultural resources. Agriculture, once accounting for around 10% of Gaza's economy, could no longer meet the population's food needs. According to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, only 3% of Gaza's agricultural land remains available and undamaged. As farmland shrinks, the Al-Qarara Seed Bank continues protecting local varieties and supporting farmers to help preserve Gaza's agricultural resources and restore food production.
And this was Hussam Burkan's news report about the seed bank, which is helping farmers protect local crops and preserves food production amid widespread destruction of agricultural lands by the Israeli occupation. Foreign ministers from Algeria, Turkey, Indonesia, Jordan, Lebanon, Malaysia, Mauritania, Pakistan, Palestine, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Somalia strongly condemned the Israeli occupation airstrikes targeting the Abu al-Duhur military base in northwestern Syria. In a joint statement issued on Friday, the ministers described the attacks as a dangerous escalation and a blatant violation of Syria's sovereignty, territorial integrity and political unity.
Ministers expressed deep concern over the continued targeting of Syrian territory and the deterioration of its infrastructure. These actions directly threaten to undermine Syria's ongoing efforts to restore security, rebuild national institutions, and address the humanitarian consequences of years of protracted conflict. The ministers also stressed that Israel's continued violations of Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity risk escalating tensions, undermining regional peace and stability, and eroding respect for international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter.
3 Sudanese civilians were killed and others injured after rapid support forces shelling targeted civilians in West Kordofan state. Sudanese media reported Friday that the RSF shelled a civilian vehicle in the Al-Sa'tat villages of West Kordofan as it was traveling to Al-Ubaid in North Kordofan. The attack killed 3 members of the same family and seriously injured 2 others. The Sudanese army said its forces had successfully targeted what it described as strategic RSF positions in the city of Al Nuhud, West Kordofan. Army sources told Algeria's international channel All24 News on Friday that military aircraft targeted RSF facilities in Al Nuhud, including training centers, weapons depots and supply warehouses in southwestern Kordofan, reportedly hitting their targets successfully. The Sudan Doctors Network said that the healthcare system has completely collapsed in areas controlled by the Rapid Support Forces amid restrictions on the entry of medical supplies and humanitarian aid. Speaking to All24 News on Friday, network spokesperson Mohammed Faisal said the RSF continues to target charitable, healthcare and relief groups operating in areas under its control.
Unfortunately, the healthcare system in areas under the control of the Rapid Support Forces is completely paralyzed. In our assessment, it is operating less than 10% of its capacity. The health conditions of civilians in those areas are extremely critical. The RSF also spares no effort in targeting all charitable, medical, and humanitarian relief convoys heading toward the region. One example is what happened recently, when convoys carrying medicines and humanitarian food supplies to those areas were targeted by RSF drones.
The UN's chief Ebola coordinator Julian Hannes warned on Friday of a rapidly accelerating Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Speaking at a press conference, Hannes said the virus had killed 2,500 people over the past 3 months, half of them in the last 20 days. He warned that the spread of the virus is outpacing response efforts, with the outbreak now covering an area larger than France.
The Ebola outbreak is growing exponentially. In the last 3 months, 2,500 people have died, and half of those in the last 20 days. The epidemic is spreading to an area that is bigger than France, and the outbreak is growing faster and wider than the Ebola response. And all of this is happening in an area which has had 3 decades of conflict and is generating huge humanitarian needs.
Ukrainian authorities said at least 18 people were killed and 120 injured in a Russian drone attack on a shopping center in Kryvyi Rih. Regional officials said the death toll could rise as fires engulfed shops inside the center. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the attack came in 2 waves, with the second drone striking about 30 minutes after the initial attack and targeting emergency responders. Russian authorities said 3 people were killed in Ukrainian attacks on the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The authorities said Friday that 2 people were killed in Donetsk and 1 in Luhansk, adding that the attacks targeted areas under Russian control in both regions. Ukrainian Energy Minister Denis Shmyhal said Russian attacks over the past 6 months have damaged or destroyed more than 300 gas filling stations across Ukraine. Speaking during a parliamentary session on Friday, Shmyhal said the damage represents significant losses for the Ukrainian economy. The Kremlin described the Nord Stream pipeline explosions as terrorist sabotage targeting Europe's political and energy infrastructure. Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Friday that those who built the pipelines and launched the first Nord Stream project had invested in Europe's energy future and economic competitiveness.
Those who blew up one of the Nord Stream pipelines carried out an act of terrorist sabotage, targeting Europe's political and energy infrastructure. Those who invested in building the pipeline, with its 2 lines, and inaugurated the first Nord Stream pipeline were investing in Europe's energy future and the competitiveness of its economy. They made a genuine contribution rather than simply making statements to ensuring energy security across Europe.
Algerian Prime Minister Sifir Rieb, representing Algerian President Abdelmadjid Tebboune, attended a reception hosted Friday by Italian President Sergio Mattarella and Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni for delegations attending the opening of the 20th Mediterranean Games in Taranto. Rieb conveyed Tebboune's greetings and Algeria's appreciation for Italy's preparations, while Mattarella and Meloni reciprocated. The meeting also reaffirmed the stronger Algerian-Italian partnership and commitment to expanding cooperation. This brings us to the end of our news bulletin. To catch up on any part you missed or get the latest updates, you can always visit our social media platforms or our website. From me and from the rest of the team, thank you for watching. See you next time.